The night the storm rolled across the high desert, Jonah Briggs thought he was the only living soul for miles. The wind howled like a wounded animal, rattling the wooden boards of his lonely ranch house. He was banking the last embers of the fire when a desperate pounding hit his door, 3 frantic knocks, then silence, then one final weak tap that barely held strength. Jonah froze. No one ever came this far out. Not in weather like this. Not at this hour. He opened the door slowly, expecting trouble, but what he found was a girl. Barely standing, soaked through, shivering so hard her teeth clattered. Her clothes were torn, her braids undone, dust and blood mixed on her skin. She looked up with eyes that held a lifetime of fear. Her voice came out as a cracked whisper. "If you don't take me, I won't last the night." Jonah wasn't a man easily shaken. Years alone on the frontier had carved him into stone. But something in her voice hit a place inside him he thought had dried up long ago. Without a word, he stepped aside and let her in. She stumbled once, twice, then collapsed just inside the threshold. Jonah got her to the fire, wrapped her in blankets, and worked in silence. His hands were steady the way they'd been when he used to help his late wife through her bad winters. He had thought he'd buried every soft part of himself with her. But as the girl curled toward the heat like something starved of warmth for too long, Jonah felt those old instincts flicker back to life. Hours later, when the storm softened, she stirred. He gave her water. She drank like she hadn't tasted anything clean in days. "What happened to you?" Jonah asked gently. The girl hesitated, her voice trembling. "My name is Laya. Some men, hunting for Apache girls. I escaped. I ran until my feet bled. I didn't know where else to go." Jonah felt heat rise in his chest, not anger, but something deeper, a quiet fury that had simmered in him since he witnessed the cruelty this land often demanded. He nodded slowly. "You're safe here," he said. Laya's eyes softened, but there was still fear hiding behind them, fear that safety was only temporary, fear that kindness always had a cost. Over the next days, Laya healed slowly. She barely spoke, flinched at sudden noises, and kept her distance. Jonah let her. He'd learned long ago that people opened like wild horses, only when they chose, only when trust felt safer than running. He made her tea in the mornings. Left food on the table without asking questions. Repaired the door so the wind wouldn't scream through the cracks. And every night, he left a lantern burning in the hallway so she'd never wake in darkness. One evening, Laya finally broke the silence. Jonah was sharpening his knife by the fire when she spoke timidly. "Why did you help me?" Jonah paused. "Because someone should have helped you long before I came along." Her eyes filled, not with fear this time, but something he'd seen only in people who had lived too much pain too young, disbelief at kindness. She nodded and whispered, "You're different from the men I've known." Jonah didn't answer. He just kept sharpening the blade, letting the rhythmic scrape fill the space between them. But the frontier doesn't stay quiet for long. Trouble always finds the ones trying to outrun it. One morning, Jonah found tracks near the property, horses, 3 of them, circling wide like predators surveying a wounded deer. Laya recognized them immediately. "They're the men," she said, voice barely steady. Jonah felt something old rise in him, the same protective instinct he once felt for the family he'd lost. This land had taken enough from him. It wasn't going to take her too. "You hide inside," he told her. "Let me deal with them." "No," she whispered. "I can't watch someone else die because of me." Jonah looked at her for a long moment. Then he tilted his hat and said, "No one's dying today." When the riders returned, the sky was dull and heavy. They rode up with arrogance, spitting tobacco, their guns hanging low like dead snakes. The leader, a man with a scar crawling across his jaw, called out, "We're looking for an Apache girl. Stole something that wasn't hers." Jonah stepped forward. "She's not here." The man smirked. "Funny. Tracks say otherwise." Jonah didn't blink. "Turn around. There's nothing for you here." Scarjaw leaned in his saddle. "Boy, we've been paid to bring her back. Don't matter how." Jonah's voice dropped. "You'll leave this land the way you came, upright. Or you'll be carried." The standoff lasted seconds but felt like hours. Then Scarjaw reached for his gun. Jonah moved first. A crack tore through the air. A body hit the ground. The other 2 hesitated, not expecting a lone rancher to be that fast, that certain. Jonah didn't raise his voice, didn't threaten again. He just cocked the rifle once more. "Go." They went. When Jonah returned to the house, Leah stood inside the doorway, tears streaking her face. "You could have died," she said. "Maybe," Jonah replied, "but you've suffered enough." She stepped toward him. Her hands trembled as she reached out, resting one against his rough shirt. "You don't know what it means, to have someone stand for me." Jonah swallowed. Everyone deserves someone to stand for them. She leaned her forehead against his chest and let herself cry, not the kind of crying that breaks, but the kind that frees. Jonah held still, letting her choose how close she wanted to be, letting her decide the pace. Weeks passed. Leah grew stronger, steadier. The fear in her eyes faded into resilience. She learned the ranch routine, fed the horses, laughed for the first time in years, and Jonah found himself softening in ways he hadn't allowed since losing his family. One evening, as the sun melted into gold across the prairie, she sat beside him on the porch. "You saved my life," she said quietly. Jonah shook his head. "You saved your own life. You survived everything before you reached my door. I just gave you a place to rest." Leah smiled, a small, trembling smile that carried hope. "Still, I'm glad it was your door." Jonah looked out across the land, feeling something peaceful settle inside him. "Me too." As time went on, their small, unlikely partnership became a quiet miracle on the frontier. Not romance born from desperation, but connection born from respect, and from two wounded souls learning that healing doesn't come all at once. It comes in steady steps, shared silences, and gentle spaces where fear finally loosens its grip. Leah found a home. Jonah found a reason to keep living. And every night, when the lantern glowed warm in the hallway, it reminded them both of the moment everything changed, the night a terrified girl whispered, "If you don't take me, I won't last the night." And a lonely rancher chose kindness. In the Wild West, heroes weren't always the quickest on the draw. Sometimes they were simply the ones who opened their door.